Hey, welcome back to the Gurge. In this video we're going to install the bias pot on the MESA Express 525. Hopefully you saw the other video where I explained what the modification is, and in this video we're just going to go ahead and actually do the mechanical part of the modification, and we'll put the amp back together and make sure that we're able to bias the tubes. If you like this kind of content, if you like do-it-yourself stuff, things in the garage, amplifiers, heaters, cars, trucks, motorcycles, four-wheelers, I'm doing videos on all that stuff, so I'd really appreciate it if you would hit the subscribe button and stay tuned into the garage. Alright, so I've got the amp disassembled and I've marked the location where I want the potentiometer to go for the bias pot. I'm going to drill a pilot hole there. I'm not sure you can see that, but I marked it with a Sharpie. I'm going to actually pull the power tubes out so the vibrations of the drill don't affect the power tubes. I don't think it would bother it, to be honest with you, but I'm just going to take it out anyway. So I'm going to drill a pilot hole right there. The bias pot is going to fit right here. And by the way, folks, just so you know, I did drain all the residual voltages out of the capacitors, and the amp is safe. I should not be shocking myself. If you don't know what you're doing with the tube amplifier, I probably said this before, but don't mess around with your tube amplifier. It's not something to be taken lightly. So with that said, here's where the pot's going to go. It's going to fit right there, like so, and it is well out of the way of everything else. I kind of actually wanted to put it a little closer over here and remove these standoffs that are used for the tube shield and maybe replace the tube shield with something, but I don't have anything available to do that just yet. So I'm going to go with this. It'll be fine. I can reach under here and adjust the bias and it'll be out of the way. So let's go ahead and drill the pilot hole. Actually, let's take the tubes out, power tubes out, and we're going to need to do this anyway because we're going to have to measure the bias once we get the bias pot installed. And if you saw my previous video, you would see that these are MESA branded. These are yellow. They're running fairly hot, not as hot as the other set that I recently received. I forgot the color of those, or the color grading they used on that. Anyway, let's get this done. Let's get the hole drilled. So I'm going to drill a pilot hole first. So something I've learned over the years about drilling holes in metal is go slow. You don't need to develop a super amount of speed with your drill bit, and you don't want it to grab on something when it goes through and spin the work around that you're working on, the piece of work. I'm going to go ahead and clean this up real quick. I saw a little piece of metal jump up there. You definitely don't want metal flakes flopping around in your amplifier, so let me get a vacuum and get this cleaned up mostly, and then I'll finish it up. Alrighty. Alright, so I'm pretty confident I've got all the metal out of here. I've cleaned under the board, and I'm actually going to get some compressed air and spray and just make sure nothing's floating around in there. And we'll do that after we install the bias pot. So let's make sure this is going to fit in the hole that we drilled, which it should do nicely. So I might have to file that hole just a little bit. Yeah. I feel like it's going to be a good good fit. I'm going to get a round file and just clean up the edges here. Probably overkill for this job, but I'm going to just put a dab of blue Loctite on the potentiometer before I screw it down. And that'll just ensure that things don't wiggle loose while we're playing. Blue Loctite is what I like to use on anything that you might decide that you're going to take apart again. Red Loctite is the stuff you want to use if you don't ever want to take it apart. You need to apply a lot of heat to get that apart. So I'm just going to put a dab. That's probably more than I wanted to put on there. But let's see here. Alright, so one thing I've learned about potentiometers is to be careful tightening them. Don't over tighten them. I've ripped the barrel off of a potentiometer before by over tightening. And I'm going to flip this around so the transformer, the heavier transformer is on the bottom. It's not so top heavy. Let me get a grip on that. Hold the other side. So we want this to be tight, but don't go crazy with it. Remember that I did put a little bit of blue Loctite on there. There we go. And there's a lock washer on this side and a washer on the other side, so it goes without saying that it's not going anywhere. So we've got the potentiometer installed. Next step is to desolder these two resistors on the ground side and get some heat shrink put around them to keep them stood off the board, and then install our resistor or resistors on this side of the ground side, a wire here going to the potentiometer, and the other side of the potentiometer going to the new resistor that we're installing. Put something in place to keep it all stable, probably some hot glue, maybe a zip tie. We'll see what we come up with. Alright, so I'm going to desolder these two resistors from ground and stand them up. I'm going to try to do that without burning anything in the amp and messing up the circuit board. If I were going to fully remove these, I'd probably just cut the resistors and then desolder the leads, but I just want to leave them in place in case I wanted to put the amp back to stock or somebody wanted to put the amp back to its stock configuration. So sometimes when you're doing this, you have to reflow the solder joint a little bit to get it heated up. Quite get in there. Go. And it looks like that was hooked under a little bit. Probably be safer to cut these. I just don't want to do that. Go. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is get a little bit of heat shrink, wrap it around that, maybe some hot glue after I get the next resistor soldered in there, and then kind of keep all those together, stand them off, and some hot glue. I don't think I need zip ties. I think the hot glue will hold that together and keep it from wiggling around. So I think what I'm going to go with is the two 15K resistors put in parallel, which will give me two things, because it'll give me two things. One, it's going to raise the resistance, the minimum resistance to 7.5K, where this was, I believe, 8.92. And I never had some tubes that were needed to be any hotter in here, so I think that's pretty close to the minimum that we want to get to. This will give us a little swing in that direction if we need to on any tubes, and we could always come back and replace it, I guess, if we wanted to. The other thing is, these look like 1 watt resistors to me, although I'm not sure. They could be half watt, but I've only got half watt resistors, and that way I'll be splitting the current between the two, and I'll have a 1 watt resistor here. I did do the math, and it is not necessary to have a 1 watt resistor in this circuit, but looks like we'll be safe here with these two resistors. I really like this wire. It's Teflon coated. The sheathing on it doesn't melt, and it kind of protects your fingers when you're using it. So nice. Now I need a wire from here to here. Before I do that, I'm going to put some heat shrink over the ends of these resistors. And I decided just to pull out those resistors. They are right here. Just seemed to be getting in the way, and the heat shrink wasn't really doing the trick that I needed it to do. So I just pulled it out, and that'll be that. Let's get the heat shrink on there. And try not to light anything on fire again. Lighter. I think that'll just help strengthen things. Alright, so I've got the amp on, the tube bias meter installed. I was able to lower these down to 8.5 watts. That's the right tube. I'm actually going to check the other tube. I'm going to switch these in just a second, but just to show that this does work, let me get the screwdriver into the bias pot. Oh, almost there. There we go. So you can see we can lower the bias considerably, take it down to very cold. Notice that as the bias drops, the plate the plate voltage goes up. So as the tube is using less power at idle, the plate voltage is going to go up. And let's turn this up, 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 up. We're going to get to just about 70% at 8 watts. And you'll see that our plate voltage is considerably higher than it was when the tube was conducting a lot more power. You can see as we turn that and raise the tube up to where it was, which was, I believe it was like 10 or 11, I'm not sure, but you can see the plate voltage drops. So I'm going to bring this down. I'm going to leave this side at just about 8 watts, 70% of idle dissipation. And then I'll turn the amp off, let the tubes cool, and switch to the other side. So you got to be careful chasing these numbers around. Again, I'm just trying to get it exactly at 8 or roughly at 8. If it's a little bit over, I'm okay with that. Certainly running a lot cooler than it was. And I play fairly clean and use pedals for any kind of distortion, so I'm not really looking for the power tubes to be running super hot. I find that I actually, on my Fender amps, I like running them cold. I like the sound of that better. Alright, so there we go. We're just about at 8, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to turn the amp off, let it cool, and swap the bias meter to the other side and see what we're getting. So I've just turned on the amp, and we're seeing the readings of the tube on the left. It is running a little bit hotter at 9.3, so it's running quite a bit hotter. I'm actually going to lower that down, and I know that's going to make the one on the right run a bit colder because of the way the balance is on this, but I'm not too worried about it. I really just don't want the tubes running as hot as they have been. This is not horrible. I just want it down a little bit. So I'm going to take it down to about 9, and I know that's going to lower that one. I'm not actually going to go back and remeasure. I'm not too concerned about it. I think it'll sound fine. And that's really the key. Does it sound okay, even though we've quote-unquote got the bias set a little bit cold. So I'm going to take this down just a little bit. Okay. Okay, so this one's going to be running just over 8, almost 9. The other one now will probably be at 8 or just under 8, and I'm okay with that. Okay, so yeah, as this warms up, 8.8, yeah, I'm good. I'm happy with this. Thanks for taking this journey with me as I modified this MESA Express 525. This is by far one of my favorite amps. I've played it quite a bit, but I've just gone through a lot of tubes, had tubes red played, been through tech support with MESA, and finally, since the amp is now 10 years old, I'm okay with modifying it and putting in the bias adjustment pot. Again, I want to point out that this was for entertainment purposes, just kind of documenting my process. I'm not advising anyone to do this. I'm not advising you that the way I did it was the correct way to do it. I hope that you saw my previous videos and understand the rationale and how I came to that decision myself. And again, I'm not making recommendations on what anybody should do. So please, I do appreciate if you reply in the comments about your thoughts on the modification, and maybe share if you've got an Express 525 or a 550, and tell me about how your tubes are working and what you're seeing there. I like hearing about that. I'm also on the Mesa Boogie forum, and I've been documenting this process there as well. So thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Please hit the subscribe button. There's going to be more guitar content and diesel heater content and garage content and what have you. Solar power content, all the stuff that I like to do kind of as a hobby. So thanks again for watching, and hope to see you soon in the Gurge. This is an update on the mod that you saw installed in the amp. I made these changes at a later time. I modified the circuit slightly based on some feedback I received on the Mesa Boogie forum. Feedback made sense, and the mod that I put in, as you saw in the video, works fine and is perfectly okay, but I like the idea of connecting the other unused leg of the bias pot directly to the wiper in the event that something happens to the wiper and that it disconnects. What would happen is we would just get a 17.5K resistor to ground, and it would bias the tubes very cold, but it wouldn't cause a problem. It would just make the tubes run very cold, and the amp would probably not sound that good. So that's really the only modification I made. You can see here I've got a picture of that modification. And by the way, that little chunk of metal I found in the amp, and I cleaned that out and took that out. So this is what was the unused leg connected to the wiper. Notice that the yellow wire is the one connected to the wiper, and when we go over to where the resistors are wired into the board, you'll see that the yellow is getting the current from the bias supply, and the gray wire is going to the two 15K resistors that are in parallel, and that makes them 7.5K, and those are going to ground. This is just hot glue to hold everything together and keep it from moving. I know it doesn't look that good, but it works great. I also rebiased the amp to run a little bit hotter than what you saw in the video. I ended up with the right tube running at about 8.3 watts and the left tube at 9.9, which is more than 70%, but I found that the amp was sounding a little bit, I don't know, sterile and unresponsive. It was really just feeling when you played it. So I biased the tubes a little bit hotter. I know the left side is a bit over 70%, but considering where things were at when the amp was running with the stock configuration, I'm much happier with the setup. It sounds fantastic. I used it today, and I'm very, very happy with this modification. If you would, please subscribe to The Gurge. I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching.